Okay, well, it seems that we'll go ahead and begin. It is now 1 o'clock, well, in a few seconds anyways. Okay, so my name is David Gieslin, and I am the president superintendent of Indiana Deaf School and president of CEASD. I want to thank CEASD board for this wonderful idea of hosting the multiple sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays related to various topics. And this is all in cahoots with the CEASD vision of just letting our kids thrive, and doing that through supporting the various schools for the deaf and programs for the deaf. And we just want to empower all of the schools and bolster them, and sharing ideas in this format is one great example of how we can do that. So I do want to introduce our presenters, but before I do that, I do want to thank some important aspects of having this hosted. The American School for the Deaf is supporting by providing the Zoom platform so that we can all have these virtual meetings. I also want to say thank you for the two interpreters, one from Texas School for the Deaf, one who was previously working at the Atlanta area School for the Deaf. Thank you both for providing interpreting services. We also want to thank California School for the Deaf Riverside for providing us one of our presenters, Denise Taylor, who will be mediating the discussion today. We want to thank Barbara Raimondo for her just legal expertise. We are very fortunate to have her as a part of this group. If we do have a small number of participants, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that we all show our faces and start our videos. Come up on screen. Okay, hello. So I have just learned from one of our interpreters, Kat from Texas, who is familiar with Zoom. If you want to, you can rename your video so that we can see your name and the school that you are from. So if you look at your video square, at the very top right corner of your video square, there's a blue icon with 3 dots. If you click on that, you can then rename it. As you see, I'm David Gieslin from Indiana Deaf School. And that way we can all monitor where people are from and who's going to be speaking. For some reason, it's not letting me rename. Just interesting. Okay, now I want to see every participant. Beth Fields, there you are. Okay. Okay, let's see if we can get each one of us to start our video and show up on screen. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a very small group. Let's go ahead and maintain our videos on screen throughout this presentation. Sounds great. All right, good morning. Hello, hello. Okay, so I am now going to hand this over to Denise and Barbara to begin this discussion related to IEPs and IDEA and what everything means in today's situation. What does the law say, and what does our Secretary of Education, DeVos, say? All of the things that are now happening. So I'm going to turn the floor over to the two of you. Thank you, ladies.
Hi, everyone. Hi, and thank you so much for joining us today. Well, morning, afternoon for some of you. I'm very happy to be here with you all to talk about IDEA and IEPs. I'm thankful for my partner, Denise, to share the platform with me. We are sharing the responsibility, and I'm planning on talking from a federal level, sort of an overview of the issues. And once I have run through those issues that I have listed, I'll turn it over to Denise to talk about the on-the-ground, frontline, everyday service provision. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, if I can.
And it may be needed if you want to pin Barbara as the video that you can see, as well as the shared screen. Okay.
All right. Well, first of all, I'll begin my PowerPoint. I'm thrilled to see everyone here, and I'm thrilled that I can also see my own PowerPoint. So let's begin with long ago in the month of March 2020. It may feel like eons have passed, but really we're only talking about 3 months ago. It's just a different world that we're talking about, and it feels different. The pandemic began and shook everything that we knew, and all of a sudden, administrators became concerned, advocates became concerned, parents, of course, were concerned. Everyone was truly concerned about the field of education and what was going to happen. And really, we have to follow IDEA no matter what, if you're in school, in person or not. But there also became the need for a good amount of flexibility. Flexibility because of online education had it was a new educational environment. So flexibility was necessary. Also supports, for example, the Conference of Administrators, NASKCE, state directors of education. All of these organizations started to reiterate that the emphasis on flexibility in education and in education situations. So everyone's agreed that we should not change anything about IDEA, because once you tweak one thing, it changes everything. And that was a real concern that everyone had about the IDEA. Advocates began to feel that the importance, or began to speak about the importance of civil rights to receive education, and families receiving education. And so that became the message to Congress and to the Department of Education. I wanted to mention that the PowerPoint will be made available later. So certainly you can find it on the CEASD information that's distributed to all participants. You may be familiar with the CARES Act that was passed in March, which gave allocations, lots of money to different organizations. And I'll break that down. First of all, the US Department of Education had $31 billion distributed to the various states. 13.5 billion was for elementary and secondary education. Also, it was given to the states through their Statute 1 formula that came from the elementary and, or for the Title I formula. The states had a lot of flexibility to use those funds as needed. And really, any activity was acceptable for funding as long as it met the requirements of IDEA. $3 billion was for the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. That was to be spent. The governors were expected to develop plans to identify critical needs. And again, a lot of flexibility was allowed for those governors. And then the funding for higher education was also included. So I am curious about how if you're curious about how your state is using your fund, you should be able to join, regular calls from the state level regarding CARES Act funding. State budgets are, of course, we're experiencing some cuts, and the funding from the feds was not enough to compensate for that. This is true of every state, every LEA, every school. They are going to be facing severe cuts in the following school years. We're feeling that now, but we expect that it will go on for quite some time. We expect and foresee that there will be some financial challenges in our future. There is discussion of other bills for education, and we'll discuss that. The CARES Act also mentioned the Secretary's recommendations. The secondary CARES Act, or the CARES Act, had some stipulations, for example, related to testing. Every state received a waiver for standardized testing, the annual assessments and annual reviews. So that it was already in the law, that allowance, so it wasn't difficult to do. The CARES Act required the secretary to recommend waivers for IDEA, making it easier for each state. People were very concerned about that, you know, what will they recommend and that type of thing. The secretary gave a report in April and recommended very little, to be honest. A flexible timeline, the timeline between parts C and B, that's about tuition from early intervention, and then part B, and those all were given extra flexibility. Also, there was a section about loan forgiveness issues for personnel preparation. There were many, many recommendations that just weren't reviewed. It was very little in her report. And that's where we are from the secretary's recommendations, nothing complex. The recommendations that were given were that Congress would have to vote them into law, any changes. And today, IDEA is the same IDEA that we had in 2004. No legal changes have been made. The law remains the same, even though we are in a new situation. You may recall a few years ago, the Supreme Court case Indrew, and that developed standards which are still followed today, IDEA and IEPs. It means that the IEP must be reasonably calculated. It must enable a child to make progress. And in light of the circumstances that we have, we are still compliant with that. So how does one comply in this strange situation that we're in? And really, that's a question that we always face. Obviously, you provide the absolute best services that you can for an individual child, and you document everything that's done, every phone call, every service, every conversation. We document everything. You don't wait, you don't think, well, we'll provide this service and I'll document it later. That's not the way to do it, because things are forgotten or left off. So best practices is that we document everything. Communications with parents or caregivers, families, anything that you do, anything that you hear from them, anything that you coordinate with that family so that the child receives the best services available. And then, of course, we want to talk about this hot topic of additional funding. You might have read about the HEROES Act, which passed in the House, I want to say 2 weeks ago. Includes a lot of funding for education. The Senate has not considered it yet, and that's where we are. There is a lot of support for funding for education in DC right now, both sides of the aisle. The senators are asking leadership to please give more funding for the field of education. There are strong advocacy groups. I have signed off on a few things as well, but there are advocacy groups that have made requests. I know that many of you have heard of all of these that are listed here, but I just wanted to give you the basic federal overview level of where we are on IDEA. There's so many changes and so much discussion about education at the federal level, but I'm going to turn it over at this point for any questions or comments from the floor. I suppose in the chat box would be reasonable, or you could raise your hand somehow indicating that you would like to speak. Is anyone experiencing in your state increased funding from the CARES Act? What are you experiencing in your states? It seems that there are no questions. Something that I wanted to add was that a couple of weeks ago or last week, there was a report about funding for education that related to the CARES Act. And it does seem like a lot of money, you know, it was 16 billion. But remember that that is broken down and allocated all across the states. There are 286, you know, different dollars per student that would come from that law. And so for schools, that's really not, that's peanuts. That's really not enough. But we, of course, are keeping our eye on the funding and those discussions. And of course, the HEROES Act is currently in place. So we'll see what happens there.
No.
Go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, so in the chat, I see that David has a few questions, but maybe we could stop sharing screens so that we can make those videos larger for everyone. Okay, perfect. Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
So David, you had some questions? Yeah, okay. So my first question that I want to pose here is, in terms of just statewide, with all of the states out there, there have been budget cuts, financial cuts. Some states have cut, some haven't. Now here in Indiana, there have not been any financial cuts for the mainstream public school settings. However, state agencies, such as the deaf school and the blind school, have had about a 15% cut. Is that considered discrimination against disabilities? Do we have a case to file a complaint about discrimination?
I would say that you should reach out to the governor's office, someone at the governor's level, the government level, state level, to talk about those agencies, because you are a school. If you are labeled a school, you're a school. And I know that I've heard similar things happening with other schools because they're considered an agency. However, I would recommend that you take it to the state level. You know, you are a state agency in name only, but not in function.
Right. We do have a plan to meet with our school attorney tomorrow afternoon to see if we want to pursue this avenue or not. Now, for my second question, I know that some schools around the nation and some states have had to reduce length from the 190 to like 180, so a shorter than normal school day and school year. Is that part of the IDEA? Is it whatever the government orders, whether it be the regular time of 180 or shorten it to 160? How does that work?
I think
try to provide as much of the services and education as you can within the school year. But, you know, there may be, Denise may be better able to answer that question. Denise? Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand the question clearly. So if a regular school year is reduced in terms of number of days, does that apply to students with IEPs? Is that your question? Yeah, so for example, twice a week there may be speech therapy services provided while school is in session. But when school is not in session, then there's not any services provided in terms of speech therapy for that particular student or so forth. So if we are reducing the number of school days, are we following the same policy of also only providing speech services twice a week while school is in session, or does that maintain the 180? I think that depends on how the service provider has written their service minutes in terms of service time. So for example, if a speech service provider has put down 1,500 minutes within the school year, then you owe the total amount of minutes, whatever that school year looks like. If they have put down, you know, twice a week, then they would follow the school calendar in terms of when education is happening and school is in session. It's our obligation to follow the equitable provision of education and services similar to mainstream or public schools. Donna, if you want to take David.
And my third question, over the last several years, we have seen less and less and less of certain types of services provided through E-rate. And so you're saying that with the CARES increases, is more going back to the E-rate services or the Fed rate services?
Barbara, I'll let you answer that one. You're the money guy.
So I honestly haven't looked into the details on that, but I absolutely will look at E-rates and I can give you that answer and more information later.
Okay, great. Thank you, Barbara. I think I saw Dawn had her hand up for a split second. Dawn. Okay, we'll go ahead and Denise. Okay, well, we also had some individuals just join, and we decided that since this group was a small group, we would just maintain sharing our screen so that we could see each other. If it's too many people and it's hard to follow, then that's fine. Well, hello, Barbara White. Okay, hello. All right, well, I'll go ahead with my part. I'm not exactly sure if I should go ahead and share the screen in the PowerPoint. Is it hard to see, or, okay, I see something that's fairly easy to see even though sharing screens.
This is David. If you use a PowerPoint, I would prefer that you use one screen and everybody mute their cameras so that we are not seeing multiple screens.
Yeah, I'll second that, Barbara White saying. Okay, so you know what, for now, I'll just go ahead and do my part without a PowerPoint presentation. It will be there at a later date. If you want access to it or a copy to it, it'll be on the CEASD website.
Perfect.
And honestly, my PowerPoint is just not as pretty and put together as Barbara's, so I'll just throw that out there. Okay, so in terms of IEP accountability, it really hasn't changed. Everything has remained the same. The guidance from federal government and all of that stays the same, and we follow that annually, the timeline that they've provided for us. The only thing that's really been clear is that they've recommended that we can provide and meet our IEP annual dates through other means, such as teleconferencing, video platforming, video calls, conference calls. So that's really the only thing that's been clearly stated. My interpretation is we maintain following our timelines, and I know that in various districts we're serving, they may have other interpretations, which can also be another challenge. And I see David saying yes. So there may be some stickiness in how to address all of this with the various districts. But moving on from that, I'm very curious as to, I mean, obviously we have a yes from David, but I'm wondering if you're facing the same challenges with serving students from various districts and their approaches. Paul, or Barbara White?
Yeah, this is Barbara. Access to technology has been an issue. There might be access to technology and devices, but not internet. And so they're just simply not getting all that they need in order to access technology. That's been our biggest challenge, you know. And then also any students with cognitive impairments.
Yeah, any struggles with other districts? I think, Paul, you planned to say something?
Yeah, same here. Different districts have different expectations and timelines. So very similar struggles here.
Yeah. Oh, Jennifer?
Yeah, working with large numbers of NIC districts and also outside the city. So, sorry, with New York City districts, they expect one thing, and outside the city, they expect very different things. Some districts are very resourceful, providing lots and lots of supports for families and their homes, depending on their needs. There are other districts outside the city that are very different and very lackluster in what they're providing as far as resources. And they're depending on us for those things. They're asking us to fill in the gaps. So everybody's got a different way of doing it. Also communicating through electronic resources and providing electronic resources for students, and then some who are unable to access those, and we have to find new strategies and different ways, even sending things through snail mail. You know, one unit might be fine to do that, and then another one, you know, there needs to be handouts, and so and then one class
use Google Hangout.
Google Hangout, and then another group is using Zoom, and another group is busy working on one thing while another one is having a Zoom meeting. So lots of variety in teaching methods.
Yeah, I know that here at Riverside, you know, one of the services that's a big one for us is that, well, let me go back. So we closed our school March 16th. And from that closure, we reached out to our neighboring districts just to see what their plans were and their approach. And they said that they were refusing to use Zoom because of privacy complications. And so, well, we had already determined to use Zoom for meetings in general. We hadn't yet discussed specifically IEP meetings, but we had determined Zoom. But other districts were turning down Zoom. And so it was, what do we do in these situations? And it was a struggle to face those challenges. And then also just having some sort of technology agreements in place and so forth. Hey, oh, Jennifer or Barbara, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just
Jennifer?
wanted to add that there are a few districts that are, there are a few that are disallowing Zoom to this day. In some districts, instead, they're doing Microsoft, or they're using Google. And so we have now come up with a spreadsheet about who uses which and where and why, and so that we can provide services according to what is allowed. Some areas are allowing Zoom. Some are requiring voice calls. And so if you've got one person from our staff who has to become the interpreter in order to get together on a Zoom, at the same time that this one kiddo has to not use Zoom and has to do a call-in method. I mean, that's the best that we have come up with.
Barbara?
Yeah, I was just asking really about what you're using.
Well, so it's interesting. For the first 2 weeks, I would say that they refused to use Zoom, and then we disseminated what our plan was, and wow, CSDR is really ahead of the game, and they've already got a lot in place, and so they started having their own dialogues, and then they bit the bullet and went with Zoom. So that's created less challenges, less stress, and other districts are joining, but one district held out fairly long until they finally complied. David?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion. You know, we had a similar discussion, I guess it was a few weeks ago now. We had a town hall meeting for CEASD, and we talked about platforms that are deaf friendly and are not deaf friendly. And we had a variety of answers to those questions. Zoom seems to be the best solution for deaf users, least amount of issues. But now that they're coming up with a 5.0 or whatever it is, they're coming out with a new version. We're hoping for better bells and whistles. Teams and Microsoft Teams, there are many states that have approved that, but they have not approved Zoom. And so, but we're using it anyway. So just between you and me, we're using it anyway. So, you know, it's been, for example, using an interpreter in some of those team meetings, it's ridiculous. They're bouncing all over the place. You can't find them half the time. So asking for an interpreter to do a private Zoom on the side and then asking the interpreter to make a voice phone call into the platform has been the best solution when they use other platforms that aren't deaf friendly. Multiple users can be an issue. You know, pinning the interpreter to get them to stay still, that's been an issue.
Wow. Okay, great. All right, so let's kind of move on. So Barbara already mentioned that one of the most important things through this entire coronavirus pandemic situation is documentation. Documentation. Regardless what you're documenting, make sure it's documented. And that's going to be for several purposes. To make sure that your students are receiving what they are needing, which is number one. It's also protecting your school and yourself. And it's documenting for future planning. If a situation were to come up again, or you're revisiting something in terms of virtual education, you may want to do some sort of hybrid program in the future for your school. And it's nice to have some sort of future planning ready and documented for you to refer to. Now here at CSDR, what we're doing is that first week of closure, we did more of assessing where our school was, each department, just doing a deep dive into where are we, and students and student services, and each timeline that is possible, the IEP due dates, all of these other due dates, open assessment planning and how we're going to address those, service minutes left that we may have to provide compensatory minutes for. All of these things, doing a timeline through June. And then if we came back 2 weeks later, a month later, we were unsure. So we decided to do a comprehensive timeline for each student, sort of a matrix, so that we could all look at it and be on the same page of when things were due. And then we delegated some responsibilities to people to reach out to the families within the students that we serve. Our students also receive a PWN, the prior written notice. And that's just letting them know what is left for each student, what we will be doing, what we're unsure if we can do during this time, and then what we know that we will not be able to do. For example, you know, one service that we were unsure if we could offer was occupational therapy, OT. So how are we going to provide OT during this? We are currently now offering it. We did figure that out for ourselves, but at the very beginning, through that deep dive, we were just unsure where we were at with all of that. And so we sent that out, the prior written notice of what's going to be there, so that parents had something in black and white that they could then refer to. And then, you know, just who was still owed services. We did some research. So for example, speech therapy services. The very next day, we, you know, sent our speech therapist to a conference. We were very fortunate that we did find one free that was sort of local. It wasn't a physical in-person conference. It was through Zoom, but she or he participated in that conference and just talking about licensure. Their coursework, you know, was not really specialized for teletherapy. And so it was how to really stay in compliance with the rigid regulations that are mandated. And then if I'm not licensed, how do I do this? And so we had to find more guidance on what to do in those situations, and specific language that needed to be documented, communicated to parents, sent via snail mail about what teletherapy would look like. How would you feel about maintaining therapy services through an online platform, seeing if parents were interested or not. If parents were interested, then explaining times available, a schedule, sending that out, parents saying, yes, we're good with that, sending that response back, and then having that attached and documented and filed for each student. And we are doing that step-by-step process for each area that needs to be documented. I know Amy Mitchell, you know, using Zoom and everything, or Tammy Mitchell, I'm sorry. We have a middle school principal here from CSDR, and it has been, in Southern vernacular, bless her heart. I mean, time has gone by fast, and it has been very pressure filled. And with Zoom, sometimes it's very quick. And so the principals are like, oh, okay, I have to do this and a whole list of things. But she has many experiences and different perspectives. And I think that we've made it and been successful at it. So again, I just want to reiterate, documentation is going to be a critical aspect to all of this. Now let me ask you a question. In terms of services that your various schools are providing, have you suspended those services? How are you documenting what's needed or approaching that? Out of curiosity. Jennifer?
Hi, yeah, so I'm from the New York school, and I'm at the New York School for the Deaf at Fanwood, thank you. Our SLP services, speech and language pathology services, OT, PT, counseling, those all are the same. We are providing those, and of course we are documenting every minute of it. We have a form that was already built before school closures called the PPC, Parent Professional Contact Form, and that's a form that we fill out every time we make a contact with the parent or guardian, and we put that in the student's file so that that's all in one location, and everyone can continue that PPC form even throughout the closures. We are still using that in a digital form, but we've now come up with a spreadsheet because our contacts, our reach outs to the family are much more often. So our PPCs are a little bit off the charts. So we're now coming up with a better spreadsheet form. We also document what we use, the MQIR, middle quarter incident report. And so that's the same. Again, we've put that into the student files, and anytime we, make a contact, we send that also, we share that information with the district that serves that child. So our services in that way and our documentation system has remained the same.
Now I'm wondering, have any of those students that have needed the one-on-one services provided, that districts have provided one-on-one services, how are you now handling that?
Good question. We sent every student either a CB or a computer or an iPad. Some already had one that they were using. So when school closed, they still had their device. In elementary, they only had those that were for use in the classroom, so they don't take those home. For the first couple of weeks, any electronic assignments were missed. And so we started putting together apps that OT and PT and all of those teachers used, and packaging all that, everything up and sending those out. 4 weeks ago, I guess it was, March, April-ish, then we were all on board and we were able to start doing virtual teaching.
So very similar situation. We also sent iPads to virtually every student. We also installed apps on those and made packages to send out to them. But I guess in terms of the one-on-one, the aids, we have several, and the district is paying for that, providing the one-on-one services. But now the district is refusing to continue providing those services. And so in terms of Barbara Wright, you're saying something?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're providing those supports in the classes and everything, maintaining that. Sorry, Donna, go ahead.
We have the district support, so we're continuing to work with the aides, and the aides are also working, the paras, whatever, they're also helping. Any meeting, they're there. They're working with students and providing support as possible. We're very fortunate with that. We've not had any problem with paras or aid supports.
Oh, good. Okay. Jennifer?
Yeah, the district stopped paying for paras for one-on-one services a few years ago, I guess. And now the school pays for those one-on-one services, not the district. And so we have continued to pay for those one-on-one services while school has been closed. It's at the leadership and guidance of the teacher. The OTPT also provides those services one-on-one.
Okay, good. I think I see something in the chat. Let me double check. Oh, okay. All right, it's former comment that was made that I missed. Okay. Okay, so moving on. In terms of confidentiality, the IEP itself, not necessarily, but the services that we are providing, we've had several issues arise regarding confidentiality. So having those parents in the room with counseling services being provided virtually, or one family, for example, maybe, we were so excited. This second grade student was receiving services, counseling, and mom was not seen on the video screen. And so the counselor was discussing with this student and having a conversation, and mom was sitting in the room and off to the side and was just so happy that we've reached out to continue supporting that. But what happened was mom filmed that session and then posted it on social media. Oh, now, fortunately, mom is friends with another staff member who saw that, reached out to the mom and said, delete that post, take that off social media. And so we were able to handle that fairly quickly. But in terms of that, we had to send a confidentiality notice to the mom again in bold lettering, clearly stated language. You cannot film a counseling session that is confidential. You cannot post confidential counseling sessions. And that was for that particular parent. But staff, even, we do have some concerns with some staff not comfortable using their personal phones to make contact. Students seeing the background of their home. Now, luckily in Zoom, you can have a green screen background, so to speak, but at times it becomes very visually noisy and hard to maintain. So using a sheet of some sort to hide backgrounds in the home. But there have been some challenges with confidentiality. And again, as we mentioned before, oh, Barbara White, I'm sorry.
Yeah, about counseling. So I'm at Fremont School, and we have the same position, Denise and I. Anywho, so about counseling, you know, I don't think right now is a time for in-depth, soul-changing counseling, because we don't know who's watching. We don't know who's off screen. If we felt confident that no one was able to put eyes on the situation, then we might go a little deeper with some of our kids. But I don't believe that currently we're able to go to the same depth with our students when we're behind closed doors.
Any other thoughts? Okay, kind of looking.
I'm Janice, New York, and I'm going to use the interpreter if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Our counselor decided against providing formal counseling services, like following the counseling goals, and instead she contacts the students weekly and just kind of chats with them and plays a game, or like, how you doing and what's new, what are you doing at home. It just keeps it kind of on a less formal basis for that reason, because she said you just can't guarantee. If you can't see who's in the room, you cannot guarantee that there's not someone else there. So she is kind of doing the mandate. If it's once a week, she's doing that, but just really on a more of a less formal basis.
Mm. Right. Yeah, more surface level check-ins, seeing how students are doing. Yeah, so we are similar in terms of following that model. We do have some students who are struggling with mental health issues, and those are becoming more prominent in their current situation. And so providing services through teletherapy is a challenge. You know, not necessarily other, I mean, we could talk for 2 hours on this topic, but let me pause and move on. Oh, Barbara White, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to drag it out. I did have one other thing. Downloading work onto laptops instead of using personal devices. So receiving work on a personal laptop, that's been an issue.
Mm-hmm. So here at Riverside, we've tried a few things to protect staff. We've done doing a download our own VRS, sort of the Sorensen, downloading that, making sure that is on their personal devices, whether that be a phone or a school-issued iPad. So making sure that is downloaded so that they can use their video phones. For our hearing staff, what we've done is we've gathered all of the phones that were assigned to the school vans and buses, and we've distributed those to our hearing staff, such as speech therapy, to make contact with parents. Some are unable to use a video phone, and so that's one, I guess, reduction that we've had to worry about is any technology that we've had sort of left during this crisis and time, we've handed out to hearing staff. So that's helped out some. Looking through my notes here. No, I think we're good on that. We can move on. Okay. Now, in terms of your staff, have you experienced any resistance to doing teletherapy? We've already mentioned that the counseling seems to have lessened the in-depth services that they're providing, but any other service providers that have been hesitant are inexperienced with teletherapy or video, any willing?
Speech.
I've seen Paul say speech, yeah. Okay, so what exactly are you saying about speech? What's the reason for their hesitancy?
Well, our SLP department has developed weekly, it's a list of activities that they send out. Some are language development activities, but they can't provide one-on-one services. So it's not one-on-one services, so they're providing services in the form of activities, in different activities.
Mm-hmm. Barbara?
Not really. I was just going to say, at first they were nervous about providing services in a virtual way, and then after some time in research, they found things that were working in other places. Sometimes they would say, well, with deaf kids, it's different, it's harder, it's not possible. But then they found ways to make things work and provide services to children with speech, you know, but at first there was a lot of apprehension. Yeah,
so a little bit funny. You know, we have speech. Speech is obviously one of those hot topics. We have 2 staff members that we found out there were some families that were out of state during school closure. They went to stay with another family member for support or for financial reasons during this time. Unsure of it as to why exactly, but their licensure states that they can provide teletherapy in state only. So if a student or family is out of state, they will not provide that service.
This is David, but the IEP requires it. It didn't say where you're sitting.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. So we had to calm down the situation at that time and say, look, we're not asking you to drive to the Arizona state line here. But yeah, I mean, it was just an interesting situation that we experienced. Okay, so in terms of the IEP itself, how many of you have not moved forward hosting IEP meetings? Who has suspended that?
No, we're having meetings.
Okay, so it seems like everyone continued with meetings. Okay, great. So yeah, we have continued to set up meetings virtually on Zoom. We've done a schedule, which has been eye-opening. We have what's called an IEP week here in Riverside, meaning that students stay home for that week and staff. I know Barbara White is familiar with this. So 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, yes, 2 weeks ago was our IEP week, which meant that we had a little more than 1 month to really plan how we were going to handle our IEP week. We have occasional IEP meetings before this main week to discuss results of the assessments and so forth. But we found that the biggest challenge was technology. And the solution was just to front load the parents with information. We had a designated family coordinator that called each and every family and did a practice Zoom meeting. We sent out what it would look like, information of how to handle this. We practiced it. Oh, the screen is a little too dark. The lighting is not great. Let's move around, find a good location. How are we going to share screens and what's that going to look like? How to mute and unmute yourself. How to hide your video and bring it back on screen, and just practiced through all of these minor little steps before the actual IEP meeting. Now, with front loading, we also sent out, FERPA, procedural safeguards, a copy of the draft IEP. We sent progress reports. We sent all of these documents prior to the IEP meeting. And when it was time for the family coordinator to practice with all of those, do you have these documents in front of you? Now, granted, it didn't always work. Families sometimes don't check their emails very often. And so, but providing that front loading of information really reduced the struggles and stress during IEP meetings. And I believe Tammy mentioned that, there were families that practiced and families that didn't prepare.
Yeah, I am in the middle school, and I ran 36 different meetings during the course of 1 week, 36, I'll say again. Our experience with those families that we served, many of them were very happy to participate. We never really had a good number of show up for those meetings. So this was kind of the first time that we had such big numbers. So it seemed like Zoom was actually a great way to reach out to families. Many of the parents were actually, they said they felt more prepared this year than ever before. And I think it's because of that front loading method, sending out everything that they were going to need ahead of time, get them prepared, and they've got it in their head before they logged on. The only the time was a real struggle. There were, families or school districts when they didn't really have reliable internet. People were freezing or disappearing. So that was, of course, an expected difficulty. But it was fairly rare. It wasn't too common. And we had a very good experience for IEP week. And we got done with so much work in 1 week's time.
Yes, round of applause, because Tammy, your department, you won the award here at Riverside. Let's just say that. So big round of applause.
Me, that's me. I was the IEP queen.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so a similar concept to the front loading. We also, within our own student services, kind of collaborating with all of our principals, created a cheat sheet for the teams and what to do, an if-then type of scenario matrix. So if parents didn't show up, what would we do? If a district representative didn't show up, what to do? We had sort of a step-by-step checklist there prepared for them. If a student qualifies or doesn't qualify for ESY, language readiness and questions related to that, providing ESY through distance learning, virtually, how are we going to document this and document that? If a question about compensatory services arose, how we would document and delegate that. And so it was sort of a cheat sheet, a guidance for those running those meetings. And it's also helpful for any future planning of Zoom meetings with those families again. So just some quick stats for our IEP week. We had 228 meetings scheduled for that week, in 1 week, mind you, 228. 225 were completed, which means that only a few families didn't show up for their meetings. I mean, that is a high rate. I mean, 90% signed and done. To me, that says that Zoom is very effective for working with our families, especially in this particular area of California, and I'm sure Texas, where there's just long distances, geographical distances that are hard to meet, and a high percentage of participants, more than the in-person IEP meetings. And family involvement is such a key component. Having the families read the IEP beforehand, preparing themselves with any pre-questions. I mean, it was so rare to experience. And there are some families that are so far in very remote rural areas where the IEP is just not their forte, but now they felt more prepared because of that front loading. And so I'm wondering if experiencing IEP on Zoom or our virtual platforms, what are some successes or challenges you face? Dawn?
Yeah, I have one. So, and you might be about to say the same thing, sorry. So an IEP meeting can be long and complex. We just do a lot of discussion for the year in review and looking at IEP goals. There's also interpreting for the parents as a consideration. If you've got people on 2 different platforms, you've got 2 different problems. And many people had not used Zoom, maybe VPs, you know, but all the staff people had used Zoom. So it meant figuring out where is the interpreter and where do we want to place the interpreter so that we can all access the interpreter and the student. Some students needed a CDI, so that meant another tile that needed to be visible. So it got really twisted really fast. What helped was practicing a couple days ahead of time, setting up how they were going to do it during the IEP meeting, if you're at home or wherever you are. And that was for our staff people too. And it was hard, but it made things work out and got us through it. But I think there were 5 interpreters in one of my meetings. Yikes.
Okay, so now I'm wondering, with other languages being a part of the meeting, such as needing a Korean interpreter, having third-party interpreters join, we've found what's most helpful for that interpreter is to use a phone call to the parent, more of a phone line. It seems to have worked out similar. Is that what you would say, Cynthia?
Yeah, that's exactly. But I will back it up a little bit. Using Spanish interpreters or other spoken language interpreters, Oh, and by the way, I'm Cynthia Floyd from, from Indiana School for the Deaf, and my big boss, David, is right there. Anyhow, so there are several of us from here from Indiana. Yeah, I'm seeing you guys making the same comments that, experiences that we've had. Moving to Zoom, it's what we had to do, and we did it. And our IEP schedule for the year was sent out 1 year ahead of time. So then again and again and again, it got sent out as a reminder. So everybody was on board and knew when the date was coming. Even by March, when we knew that Zoom was about to happen to us because everyone would be at stay-at-home quarantine, we knew, your date is coming. It's still going to happen. It's going to be different. It's going to be on Zoom. So we want you to practice. And luckily, our teachers had already, been using Zooms for teaching sessions. And so families often were asking their own children, hey, can you help me with the Zoom? Okay, it was actually pretty cute to get the kids involved in that way. But it worked. It worked wonderfully. If we struggled, we would switch to a plan B, whether it was a voice call or a VP call or, a direct phone call. About interpreting, we used other interpreters as well. And I found that using FaceTime, you could pull up 2 interpreters, one on your Zoom and one on, your Spanish or your spoken language interpreter could be on another video on FaceTime. And that way, if you had them in separate places, then you weren't trying to click and pin and move and shuffle tiles around. And so that was what was happening behind the scenes. We were experimenting with those things. My biggest problem was pulling up the IEP. Because then you can't see the people's faces and you can't see the signing people. And so you've got too many boxes over boxes. So, but same here, our families were participatory, our families were engaged. One family forgot, even though all of those reminders, but there were a couple families that forgot. Somebody overslept, or, we'd have to delay and do it a different day, things like that. So same old things that everybody has probably seen, but overall it was a success story.
Good. And that brought to mind one thing that we've seen, the IEP itself on screen. Some of our staff have used their iPads as sort of a second screen so that they wouldn't have to, keep going back and forth in terms of what they're seeing, but they did have to look back and forth at different screens. Now, I am very sorry for one of our committees here, but in terms of the printing of the documents ahead of time so that you would look at a hard copy, black and white, and so for those staff or some of the families that only have one device at home, if those staff had 2, maybe they don't have a home computer or something. I was very shocked to hear that. This is the year 2020, and we have individuals that have decided not to have devices in their household, and they don't have Wi-Fi in their house. And I'm like, wow, okay, it's important we provide that Wi-Fi access to our students, but my goodness, now let's also provide it to our teachers and help them set up that technology. And so it was eye-opening. Okay, so kind of getting back to a point here of the goal of what we can and can't do, but the main thing is document. I cannot say that enough. Let me say it. Document, document, document everything. Barbara White, did you want to add a little bit more? No, I'm sorry. Barbara Raimondo, did you want to add anything more? I'm sorry, there's 2 Barbaras here. So CEASD, Barbara, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Not really. I appreciated all of the different experiences and stories that have been shared. It confirms my strong belief that our schools are doing much better than many places out there. I congratulate each and every one of you because it's true. The law has remained the same. Documentation is critical. Communication is critical. These are the same protocols that you may have had in place before, just more emphasized than ever before.
Right. And, communication is key, but I think now even more so. I really have to commend Tammy again here. Communicating with parents, communicating with the family education coordinator, and having them communicate with parents, and how we can provide that support and help, sending out communications, ensuring that all of our parents are involved. But now there's a struggle of being overloaded with digital input, emails coming from this and that, and just being overstimulated with these virtual communications. And just their inbox is filling up beyond belief. And so we have to be leery of over communicating. But we've been effective in it thus far. And our team has discussed what we want to be doing in the fall. Are we going to continue with Zoom meetings? Is your school now, taking those things into consideration, Barbara White?
Yeah, offering choices, I think. Maybe saying, do you want to be in person or Zoom? I think it's nice now that we've been through this to offer the option. Why not? Why not offer the option? Of course, our school is different. It used to be that Riverside was, a week long, everything happens in 1 week. Now we do several IEPs, February, March, and April. So our IEP coordinator decides, how those things happen. And if somebody's not comfortable with technology, they would have the option, of course, to come to school. But others that might want to depend on technology instead of making their way to the school, that's an option. And so I think that there are people that would say, yes, I have the technology and I'm comfortable with the access that I'm given. I think that with technology, I think that that's a good option for parents. Our IEPs are now spread out over 3 weeks in time. 1 week, it was just too much. And so we've spread those out to 3 weeks of time, and our coordinator handles the scheduling. I think it would be interesting to have an IEP meeting, or to send the IEP, or also to send the IEP for a review ahead of time. And then to go ahead with the IEP without meeting. Some families tell us, I have read and reviewed and am ready to sign off on the IEP and I don't need a physical meeting. So, I think that that's something that we should consider, because I believe we overschedule our families and it's hard on them. And then there are other families that say, absolutely, I look forward to the IEP meeting. I like hearing the goals and the purposes of those goals and the objectives. And so I think that there are ways to reduce the number of IEP meetings. I think that's worth the research, and offering that as, an option as we discuss that with families for signing off on IEP. That's how we're approaching our IEPs. And we've had a good level of engagement.
Mm-hmm. That's good to hear. I agree. I think that we will have, to some extent, IEP meetings continued on Zoom or other web-based platforms. I think currently my role this summer is to make sure that our physical school site is prepared. So if teachers are participating or in their classrooms, do you have a webcam capability? Do you have webcam capabilities in that classroom? And can we maintain social distancing while back on campus, while also possibly providing Zoom? So making sure that our physical site is capable to handle all of the services needing to be provided. And so we've got things working virtually off campus, off site. Now we have to get it cohesive for on site. I think also it's really nice because there are more participants with Zoom. Sometimes I lost my steps. Now that we're in this pandemic and we're just here at home kind of working remotely, my step counter is definitely less. as opposed to running across campus for this meeting and coming back to the office for that and so forth. So now all I have to do is log off of one meeting and join the next meeting within seconds. So I'm able to put out any fires that may arise. I'm able to quickly engage in different meetings. And so we have a good managed center now without having to walk across campus for various reasons. You know, in all honesty, you guys, Barbara, Armando, unless you have other comments or questions, other stories of successes, anyone that hasn't spoken yet, very curious as to what your school's been doing during IEP. Yes, Jan, I think. Okay.
Yes, I am Jan from the Lexington School in New York. Summer school programming. We follow the IEP 12-month school year calendar, and we've been in discussion about the possibility of teaching assistants or not. So I'm curious about your school. Do you provide paras or not?
During summer school. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will
provide paras for summer school.
Mm-hmm.
This is Barbara. Yeah, for teachers' assignments, the teachers are responsible for the assignment, and then the para gives that one-on-one attention and supports the teacher and the student in that way. Yeah, so we pay them for their time. This is Jan. I know that some were thinking of not doing that, and so I was just going to do a little bit of research.
Was that more for budgetary reasons?
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
This is Barbara. Every year we talk to our paras and supervisor to see who wants to work this summer. And annually we have people who voluntarily work for the summer. They want to, you know, they don't want to find other work, or, you know, they have to be working, they have to be earning hours, or they can't survive. And so we provide that as a job for them. And we budget that, of course. There's money set aside for summer, and that funding is there waiting for them. And it is designated summer funding. It cannot be used for anything else. I know other states and other deaf schools do it differently, so it's hard to compare. I don't know, you know, how your school has always done it. You know, you'd have to just ask around.
Mm-hmm. Okay. David?
Yeah, any other closing comments? I would like to thank Denise and Barbara both for your time and your input and the PowerPoints that you both created. This session has been recorded and will be posted. Captions or subtitles will be added. Stay safe, be healthy, take care. Bye-bye.
Right, bye. Bye, everyone. Bye. Bye.